Well, I just got this signal that says this hangout is on air live, so welcome to our participants and to anyone who's viewing out there. Looks like we have 2 viewers according to my screen. I'm Jenny Quinn from the University of Washington, Tacoma, and I'm sort of leading this experiment. And what I'd like to do is have everyone who's participating introduce themselves to start. So let's start with Annalisa.
Hi, I'm Annalisa Cornell. I'm at Franklin and Marshall, and I'm the governor for the Epadale section.
The MAA logo that you, well, will they see the MAA logo?
Yes, they will, but don't worry about it.
Okay, the MAA logo is Laura McHugh, who's helping us behind the scenes. Rick, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Rick Gilman from Indiana, and I'm the chair of the Committee on Sections.
And Sharon?
Hi, I'm Sharon Robert from Trinity Christian College. I am the Illinois section representative, and this is my first experience as governor. Right now, this is it.
Wow, welcome.
Well, we appreciate your participation. So hopefully, what started this whole discussion is sort of the need for creating a more responsive governance, and I think to better utilize our governors, to better employ their skills to the betterment of the MAA. And I hope that people took the time to watch the trailer where I sort of went through what the task force has been doing. So the task force includes Rick Gilman, myself, James Epperson from the Texas section, Michael Pearson, our executive director, and Karen Stack, the current second vice president. We really struggled for a long time with exactly what our charge was and what we were trying to get accomplished. I think that we have a pretty good handle on that now. We see our job as facilitating communication and coming up with a proposal that people can get behind and support, even though things may be extremely difficult. So rather than rehash everything that occurred in the 15 minutes of the video, I'd like to start with any questions that have sort of arisen from it. Now, there were 2 questions that occurred online, and let me pull those up so I can see them. One came from Annalisa, so I will, let me start with Annalisa's first question. Let me click on the question. Okay, so it says, answer questions by selecting one of select. So I've now selected the question that was answering. It was posed by Annalisa earlier, saying the one aspect that will shape any good governing body is extension of its professional and its volunteer. So we pay the board, for example, do we do a search for new board members, as we do for editors, do we elect them, what are the emerging opinions on this? That's a great question. What we need is the idea, what we need to see what people believe about that.
May I interrupt a second, Jenny?
Please.
This is Sharon speaking. I can't understand you very much at all. The sound is really garbled. So the last, 2 minutes or so of conversation, I've caught maybe 1 word out of 5. I don't know if others are having trouble too, if it's my system or if it's a problem overall.
Yeah, Jenny, are your speakers covered by anything?
Let me try this. Is this better? I sort of switched locations earlier at the last minute to get a hard line in.
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay, so that's sort of angling the computer up. Okay, if that's much better.
That
Okay,
helps. Thank you.
great. So I must have had a pillow or something here covering the speaker. So the question I have, the question that Annalisa has posed is our board going to become a professional board, or will it remain a volunteer board? I'm going to ask Rick to take a first stab at this, and then I'll add my two.
We have not specifically addressed this question, but my sense of the conversations to date, particularly the one at the EC, at the executive committee, was that the assumption, the implicit assumption, is that it would still be a volunteer board that comes out of the membership and percolates up from the membership in some form. The nominating process might be a little different in terms of being more careful about identifying who the board members are or who the candidates are. But I didn't have any sense that we were shifting to a paid board. I think in one conversation, or one snippet of a conversation, someone asked whether or not we would have people from outside of the association serve on the board. And that did not generate any, I don't recall that generating any sort of positive response. So I'm thinking, at least implicitly, it's still an assumption that it's a volunteer board.
In one of the case, this is Jenny again. In one of the case studies in Race for Relevance, when one of the associations went to a much smaller board, they actually started interview processes for their nomination. So there was sort of a more rigorous vetting of the volunteers getting there, but it wasn't. So you wanted to make sure that people had the necessary skills along the way, but it wasn't that they became professional members. It wasn't that people got paid to be there. I suppose we get paid because they pay for travel, which is a great thing, but it's still a volunteer position. There is professional staff, quite a large professional staff, that is really doing the actual work of the association, and they will always be there. And they're a part, their input is very important to me. But I don't see us going to a professional board in that respect. Does that sort of answer your question, Annalisa?
So this is Annalisa. So there were sort of two parts to that question. One of the questions is about payment, and that actually to me is the less important of the two. The other is just thinking hard about if we are at a very small board compared to what we have now, it's worthwhile thinking about how we staff that board. For example, right now, to be a governor, basically, there's just an election, right? And a whole bunch of people who may or may not know me get to decide whether I get to be governor. But if we have somebody, say, becoming the editor of one of the journals, we don't have an election for that. That position is so important that we have a committee who very carefully looks over all the candidates' skills, who interviews the candidates. And so even though the editors are still essentially volunteer positions, I mean, they get compensated in some way for their time, but for their teaching reductions, right? It's still a much more careful, much more professional vetting. And so I just didn't know if we had, I'm not saying we needed to decide that right now, but I think that that's one of the things that we need to think about, is that if we switch to a smaller board, we're probably changing the way that we populate that board in a significant way.
This is Jenny. I absolutely agree. And I have written down in one of our many documents where we keep track of what we're doing, I have something I call the parking lot, which are issues that need to be addressed that probably aren't necessarily the scope of this committee to address. But one of those issues is once we decide how big the board is, then we really need to think about things like how long are the terms of the members of the board, and then how do we select the members of the board. Different thoughts and different processes have been raised, but I don't think at this point we need to have that mapped out. I like the idea, really today is supposed to be about discussing the governor's forum and what the governor should be doing. And I liked the idea of involving the governor's forum in selection or the interviewing of the people who might eventually go serve on the board, and making it their job to see that the people who are serving have the right skills, but passing it through the governors in some way. But that's off the top of my head. I'd like to welcome Linda.
Hey, sorry I was late.
That's fine. That's fine. And Martha, have you joined us for real this time?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
Yes, we can. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to mark that question as done. And James has now joined us. James Epperson has joined us here. We're getting a few more people joining us. So the only other question that got posed prior to this meeting was one by Martha, which I will select, but I feel as if we sort of have addressed it. Namely, could some of the members of the board be appointed based on their outstanding service to the MAA as well as good matches to the skill set mentioned for the board members? I would think if someone was an outstanding member of the MAA, they would bring with them many of the skills, including institutional knowledge, which was one of the required skills we wanted in our, I'm looking for my notes, I switched where I was. Institutional knowledge, which was one of the skills we wanted present in the board, in addition to sort of a good knowledge of what the MAA is doing and why. I don't think someone would be appointed just because they were a good, they would give them many of the skills, including institutional knowledge. Who's talking right now? Required skills. Who was that who was just speaking? I couldn't quite tell.
I think it was someone behind Linda because the camera went to Linda.
Oh, sorry. I must have been moving. Sorry about that. I'll be still.
Hi, Jenny, this is Laura. You just need to make sure that there's nothing blocking your microphone because you're starting to sound a little garbled again.
I don't think anything's blocking me.
Okay. And use the chat option if you guys have any questions, okay? Thank you.
I'm sorry. Okay, so with that, I'm going to count that question as done, and we've sort of gone through the pre-asked question. What I would like to do now is talk or imagine a little what this governor's forum might be. If you read through the responses from the EC meeting, the Board of Governors meeting in January, you will see there's sort of a theme that the governors need to engage in strategic planning, they need to engage in communication, they need to to sort of be the ties from the section to the national organization. I think that that was a theme that came about quite a bit. So imagining, let's sort of go with the supposition that we will have a small board that takes care of the actual governing. And now the people who are in the roles of governors are going to be repurposed in a way that's most valuable for the MAA. How can we use these very talented, intelligent, skilled people to make the MAA as vibrant as possible? And now I'm looking for you for ideas here.
This is Sharon speaking. I don't know if I'm up or not, because I see Annalisa on my screen.
No, you're on, Sharon. Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to suggest that if you could subdivide governors into small task forces to support whoever is in this executive group of governors, so that people can either self-select or be appointed to areas that fit with their level of expertise and their knowledge. If you can give someone a task to do and have it be very well defined, then that usually makes life a little simpler for a group. But of course, I'm going on limited knowledge because I haven't attended a Board of Governors meeting, so I don't know how bad they are.
Sharon, they're not bad.
Bad they are. That's pretty good.
They are highly redundant. I guess that's a better way to describe it. What happens now is many of the things that the executive committee sort of decides, to put it bluntly, the larger board in essence rubber stamps what the executive committee decisions are. So there's some frustration with that cycle of having to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I've been around board meetings now for 10 years, and trust me, the conversations and the discussions that we have now about strategic planning at the board are much richer and much better than the stuff we did 10 years ago, where we literally just heard reports from the professional staff. We heard from the officers, we voted on the budget, and that was the essence of what we did. So it's a much more richer context now, but it's still not really decision-making context, right? It's much more brainstorming, strategic planning, getting to know each other, networking kind of stuff, if that makes any sense at all.
Mm-hmm. It does, but is it bad for that group of governors to act as a sounding board? Is that inappropriate? Do they have to have some decision-making processes?
No, they don't, and I think that's why the language that we've begun to invent here is this governors forum, as to figure out, I guess implies that it's being used as more of a sounding board rather than a decision-making process. But we don't know what it is they should be sounding off about. Does, for example, would the Governors Forum be a place where we make a decision, and just to use an example, of whether or not we should spend more of our publications energy into developing textbooks rather than non-textbook type publications, right? How involved are they in that kind of decision? Or is it something more broad, a broader conversation and something like that?
Well, and if I could insert, Rick, too, one of the things that we've kind of talked about at the EC meetings has been the idea that there are operational considerations that that sort of oftentimes the staff understand, but members wouldn't necessarily understand or be in a position to really make decisions about. And so sometimes those are operational decisions, and sometimes they're, anyway, so there are distinctions there in even the kinds of decisions that have to be made. And so it wouldn't be, you know, how would you bring this group of, you know, 50 people up to speed on kind of the background knowledge you would need to know in order to make that kind of operational decision? That would really be a waste of time. So not focusing on those sorts of decisions or discussion topics, right, Rick? I mean, we've kind of talked about.
I think that's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah. Okay.
Sounds good to me.
I think as long as I've been on the board, we've always discussed topics that were brought up. It was sort of the same direction that the section officers meetings have gone in recent years, where there was more participation, getting the opinions of the membership. So there was a way to, you know, get input from all across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying that's a good thing, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good thing, not just hearing reports. Although hearing some reports is fine.
Well, I have a hypothetical question for the group. Imagine we have the Governor's Forum, which is this advisory body to the board. We have our section officers, which meet annually at our national meetings. We have our liaisons with institutions, and all three of these bodies are sort of different. They're not necessarily communicating directly to each other, and they're all about communicating what the MAA is doing in all directions. And I think we're not always fulfilling the promise of these particular organizations. So is creating the Governor's Forum replicating something we already have, or can we make it something special? Who would like to tackle that?
So this is Annalisa. Hi. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, right, is the job that you do depends a little bit on how you get that job. That was related to my earlier question. At least in my section, when we choose a section chair, that happens at a local section meeting. It's a very local kind of a position. Sometimes our section chairs don't even go to the national meetings. And their job really is, at least in our section, to run the section meeting. That's where their heart is. And to my mind, a governor is different, partly because of the way that right now the governors are chosen. That we're elected in this committee, that the elections are publicized nationally, that you vote online. You don't have to go to a meeting to vote for your section governor. And so there's a way in which the governor really is a liaison to the national, a bridge between the national and the section, in a way that the section officers really are not. And for that reason, the governors have a loyalty to the larger organization built into the structure, the way that section presidents don't.
Anyone else?
Annalisa, could governors subsume the role of the liaisons? In other words, and I don't know that this works in big sections, so this is just sort of brainstorming. But much of what happens to the liaisons, liaisons were intended to be local campus connections, this bridge from the association to local campuses, but they don't seem to be functioning that way, or at least very sporadically are they functioning that way. Could we envision governors as doing that role in sort of a regional level where they would be supported to visit different campuses and interact with campuses in different ways?
So I think that that is a question that's very much worth investigating. Some of you guys might know that the last time that I was governor, one of the things that I did was I went and I visited local graduate schools, and I had a talk that I did as the governor of my section, trying to encourage graduate students to join the MAA. I figured if they weren't coming to us, I would go to them, and I really enjoyed that role. I really would have loved to have a little bit more help from the staff at the MAA, just even figuring out where my graduate schools were and who the contacts were and maintaining a database. But I think that role of proselytizing for the MAA is something that the governors really could do very well, and that it would make sense for us to have a strong connection to the, whatever it is, the new board, the new executive board, and then take this message out to our sections and help to shape the sections at a higher level. That's, in some sense, that's where we would be doing the governing.
Thank you.
So, oh, go ahead.
From a person from this is Martha from the southeastern section. From our perspective, I think that would be a little more difficult because we're 5 states. So I think it's a good idea, but I think there's still a role for the liaisons in our large section.
Right. Yeah, this is an idea. I have no idea how this would work in practice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so back to Jenny. In many sections, I think the section chair really is just focusing on the meeting and not much more than getting the meeting run. There are other things that need to happen in terms of developing the MAA at the section level, whether it's creating a section next, whether it's trying to promote contests at the local universities for the high school and middle school students to participate in. So there are other efforts that sections can be undertaking that's more than just creating an annual meeting. Some sections do a lot. Some sections do very little. And we tell our governors that it's not, presently, we tell our governors that it's not their job to run the local section, to sort of be the vision for what you need to accomplish. And I guess my question is, are we maybe thinking about changing that? Are we maybe thinking that the governor should be part of the planning of what the section should be accomplishing beyond just having a meeting? Because that's a different message than what we've been given.
So this is James. I'm not sure that my mic is coming up. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So is it the case in all sections that the governor is also part of the executive committee for the section? So, I mean, in that role, we have input when we have executive committee meetings in the section. We have input as to, initiatives, ideas, and things like that that the section can actually pursue. So, does that, so how would that be different from, I mean, how is what you suggested, Jenny, different from what I might already do in our section.
How is it different? Well, I think it's a difference of how much of a leadership role the governor is taking in pushing initiatives forward.
Okay.
I would agree with that, James. In many sections, while the governor is on the executive committee, it's a very passive role.
Oh.
They're there to report what happens at the association level, but they're not there to be anything more than just one small voice in the decision making of the section.
Mm-hmm.
So relatively few governors are helping their sections develop any sort of mission or vision of what they're trying to accomplish, much less doing any proactive actions to implement any of that.
Mm-hmm.
Is perhaps the issue then, this is Sharon, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Is perhaps then the issue training of governors into what types of expectations there are? Because my understanding as a governor, I thought, okay, I'll be involved in the section, I'll be involved nationally, I'm going to be this communicating liaison between the two, and I'm going to steal every idea I can from what happens in Indiana and in the southeastern states and bring it back to Illinois and say, hey, they're doing this. Can we afford this? Can we do this in our section as well? And try to push things forward. That's, stealing is the best part of teaching, right? Don't have to reinvent everything.
Right. Well, in the current model, that's not a primary role for governors, right? It's a byproduct of the governorship, but it's not a primary function, right? That's the purpose of, for example, the section officers meetings, and when they share things there, it's a function for what we post and the resources available on the section, the MAA section sub-website. So there are other venues and modalities for section officers to share information. And it's not been, and this is the question, I guess, is whether or not it should be a primary function for a section governor to do this kind of networking and communication of ideas.
So this is Annalisa. I think there's another part of being a governor that has not been emphasized, because Sharon, what you were talking about was lateral, going from section to section, like, oh, that section had a good idea. Mm-hmm. But there are often initiatives that the association would like to think about, membership drives or ramping up prep programs or starting section next programs. And in some ways, the governors have been underutilized in bringing these ideas from the association back to sections, which is slightly different than going side to side.
Right.
All right, let's go back to another question here. I'd like to pick up on Sharon's idea of sort of small task forces, perhaps a portfolio model for the section governors, where we have different initiatives that they're going to be considering and researching and bringing ideas back, finding best practices, and informing us. What should those task forces be? What should the primary driving factors be that the governors are taking on? Okay, let me ask it this way, since nobody's jumping. What would be an initiative that you, as a governor, would be excited to work on and make better? And I'm going to ask each governor in turn. Let's start with Martha this time.
Well, one thing that comes to mind that's been an issue, the declining in membership. How can we improve that? And another was getting more participation from the research institutions as opposed to non-research type places. So I would say those that would be something I think a lot of people might be interested in.
I agree. Let's go to James.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I think I would echo what was just said in that finding a way to bring for the MAA section meetings or the section to actually serve the different constituents, so our community colleges, our master's granting institutions, our undergraduate institutions, and then our PhD institutions, finding a way to really bring out the value added that MAA brings to each of those places and communicating that. I think that would be something that I would be interested in brainstorming about and would help our section. I know we always think about, well, on our agenda always is trying to figure out ways to involve the research institutions in a meaningful way, as well as our community colleges, and bring everybody to the table. So.
Annalisa.
I was going to say, I think it depends not only on what I myself care about, but also on what the executive board at the time really cares about. I think most of us want to feel that whatever we're doing is something that's actually going to make a difference, and it's not just busy work and filling in some role that somebody 5 years ago decided needed to be a committee role. Because some years, one of the things that we worry about a lot is questions of employment, right? That's a pretty cyclical question. We don't always have that at the top burner, right? Sometimes, especially lately, we're concerned with membership or with minority participation, or if there's a big drive nationally and the governors can actually make a difference, that's going to be much more meaningful to us than if it's just, okay, we've got 7 committees, you've got to choose one of them. You're on this one this year.
Okay. Sharon.
Well, I think for me, probably one of the things I think would be most interesting to look at would be how technology such as Google Hangout and other ways that we could train faculty to use new emerging tools to become better communicators of knowledge. If there's a group that's all about faculty development, how can you become a better teacher? How can you use the research that you're doing to be able to influence the students in your classes and in your community in a better way, so we get more people pursuing the discipline?
I'm going to make Rick say something now.
I'm sorry. Okay, can I talk?
Yes.
Would it be possible for these governors, just in terms of their work, to be organized into task forces? And I use that word for Annalisa, that they're not standing committees, but they're task force. They get formed to do something, and then they dissolve. Could we ever hope that these task forces could be organized at one meeting and accomplish a complete task, do the research, write a report, and report out within 6 months or a year? You know what I mean? Because
yeah, no, I've done things like that with the AMS.
They could generate information.
So I was going to say, yeah, I've done things occasionally like that with the AMS. I think maybe with the MAA also, and those have been very satisfying because you get to the end and you know you've done something and you've got the report and you've handed it over and other people can work on it. So that's a really satisfying task to be able to do.
Okay.
Linda, would you like to say anything on this topic?
No, I don't have anything else to add. I think the ideas you guys have shared sound great. Glad to hear it.
Okay. How are we doing? We have I can't tell what time it is. Hold on. Okay.
Jenny, I have to go in a few minutes. So could I get asked a question about the role of the council chairs as governors, and or the role of the governors at large? So in the language we've been talking about so far, we've thought about section governors, but we have these two other classes of governors. Do they still fit in this governor's forum structure?
I see everyone is jumping to answer this question.
So this is Annalisa. I think the hard part about answering that is that we haven't decided what the structure is yet. So it's really hard to know whether these other governors would fit or not.
Okay.
I guess I'm not that familiar with all of the people in these categories, but I know we have one that's related to high school teaching and what like the government and industry and that sort of thing. So I think you do bring in people that could add to the conversation. I guess those are at-large governors.
Yes.
In the model we've just been talking about, where there's like affinity groups or task forces that are working on things, it seems like those at-large and ex officio members could play the same type of a role as a current section governor would play. Yet I don't know how they get their appointment. How does an at-large person become appointed to be a governor, for example? Is there an election for those? I don't recall seeing anything about those.
It is an election that takes place at the Board of Governors.
Oh.
So they elect the at-large members. You will experience that.
Great.
In August. My take on Rick's question, and I'm trying to be quiet because Rick and I talk a lot, but my take is if this body, the Governor's Forum, is about communication, then the more people who can bring, it's not just geographic diversity, but if one of the task forces is about, increasing minority participation in the MAA, or what we can do to increase minority participation, then of course having that, governor at large for minority interests is absolutely essential. The council chairs are more interesting, and the council chairs, so our councils sort of house the bulk of our committees, and they're broken up into the councils we have. I was going to tell you how many we had. Is it 7 councils? And they're there because they've developed some expertise, whether it has to do with publications, whether it has to do with programs. So they have knowledge that they're bringing, and I think that their communication is really important. But I'd like to make sure that we have a venue for their knowledge to get to everyone, to get to the people who are making decisions. When you're working on publications, you know, that's really working with the publications program of the professional staff. I think that's a place where, you know, talking about, are we going to do more textbooks or are we going to do more general interest books? I think that's a business-driven decision, as opposed to a decision that those of us without data on markets can actually make. So I'm not saying they should be excluded from the governors, but I think we have to understand their role and the lines of communication very clearly.
Well, thank you, and with that, I'm going to hang up or log out or whatever I do to get out of here, because I have another meeting I have to go to.
Okay.
You guys have a good day.
Bye, Rick.
Bye-bye.
We only have about 10 more minutes, and what I like to do when I end a meeting is sort of a period of reflection. Like, think about the entire meeting and what is the lessons that we've learned. And I document this and I write it down. So I would love if each person could sort of share the high points, what really hit home with them, and what the most important lesson here is for them. And then with that, we'll call it a meeting, if that's all right. So let us start with, we'll go in the reverse order today. So how about Sharon?
Well, I think the takeaway for me is that there are already so many structures in place that the governors do seem to be redundant. But that whole lateral and vertical communication piece is one that we don't want to lose. So to figure out a way to build a structure that allows for those ex officio, the people who have the specialized knowledge, to get to the section governors and to be involved with the section people and to get the information to flow in a way that helps us to deal with some of the important issues, like, you know, the declining membership, serving the range of membership. You know, there's got to be a way to do this and do it efficiently. That's what my takeaway.
Thank you. Martha?
That I guess my main thing is whatever we decide, that we want it to be something that's meaningful to everyone. We want the governors to feel like they have an important role, and that whatever we end up doing, that it serves it has a good purpose for the MAA.
Okay. Linda?
Oops.
Oh, here we go. Linda?
Yeah,
Oops.
I muted myself. Am I unmuted now? Oh, Laura McHugh did it. Sorry. Actually, I'm really just listening and pondering what you all are saying, and I agree with the things that you said, and I appreciate the takeaways that you've summarized so far. I think those are really great ideas to move forward with. So.
Okay. James?
Well, I guess I may be a little biased since I was on the task force, but I think that it's a really important task that we have before us, though, trying to find a way to take the talents that the governors do have and put that in context of what we really need in the on the board. I mean, so the board, separate from what the governors represent and what they can bring to the table. I think we've heard a lot of good ideas today, and so my takeaway is that still there's something of value in what the governors represent, and finding a way to harness that, finding a way to possibly rename it where it's not the board is an important task. I cut out when the conversation was going on about the other governors, the non-section governors, those that are governors at large. And I think it's and I missed the conversation because my laptop shut off. But I think that just to say one thing about that is that I think it's still without having heard what took place, that it would still be important to find a role for them. Perhaps not the exact same role as the section governors, but I think finding a way to hear those voices would still be an important thing to the organization.
Annalisa?
Let's see, I'm going to try to be pithy. So if the MA is a giant octopus, then the executive board that we would have would be sort of like the head, and the governors would be all the arms with all the suction cup tentacles that would reach out and grab onto our local memberships. And also, I know octopuses don't have feelers, but they would also be the feelers that would bring back signals from the membership to the brain of the octopus. That's what I get.
Terrific. I like that.
Oh, you're sick.
I know. Well, in trying, I mean, I love this idea of sort of specialized task forces with missions. It's impossible for any small group of people to know what's going on in such a large organization. And if we can harness sort of the communication network to really understand what the next big thing is that we need to address for our members to keep us a current organization. I mean, I think the idea even today that this is my first professional Google Hangout, and it's an interesting way of holding a meeting. We can do this with small groups of governors on a regular basis to keep people involved and engaged and moving the organization forward, because I think in the end that's what we're trying to do. So with that, I'm going to say thank you and sign off, unless anyone else has last words.
No.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next time we'll see who else we can get involved. There will be a next time.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks
Thank you
so much.
so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Jenny.